I think you've asked, it's a really, really good question. There was a philosopher around the 16th or so century called Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He wrote this book called Amir, and it's really about educating the kids. Plato, long time before him, had written this book suggesting that since parents are usually blinded by their love for their kids, and because they don't really know the art of parenting well, what they should do is that the government, if you have a relatively good and functional and healthy government, they should come into your home, grab your child, educate him for the first 5, 10, 15, 20 years, kind of going through rehab, and then giving the child back to the parents. So let's kind of break this down a little bit. Because the first thing you need to ask is, how do, first of all, people become parents? That's the first thing, okay? And once you understand how people become parents, you will kind of blame them less, perhaps, when they make errors or mistakes, or when their kids come out, to some extent, either emotionally disabled or intellectually disabled or just life disabled, okay? So, and we've talked about this a couple of times. You know, when you're like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, and let's just say you have lived in an environment where it's not like this. You're not exposed to sex, you're not exposed to drugs, you're not exposed to alcohol, you're not exposed to trash in the streets. You're relatively innocent and clean, okay? Then around the age 14, 15, 16, or 17, much younger, let's just say about 13 or 14, hormonally something happens to you. In other words, if at the age of 5 you're just walking and there's a girl or a boy standing next to you, you don't really think much of it. It's just, does she want to play on the swings? Does she want to run? At the age of, say, 14 or 15, you're assaulted by your own hormonal psychological growth. In other words, you no longer look at the opposite sex, or depending on your sexual orientation, the same sex, as someone, all of a sudden, you have a different kind of interest. So the first thing you need to understand is sex itself, when we come to a certain place in our own psychological maturity, sex is a mystery. We're not educated in it the right way, and we don't really know why or how it happens. Again, if you come from a relatively innocent environment, you know, where people don't talk about sex, sex is not in your face, it's not on TV, it's not in media, it's not in cartoons or those. So you just allow your body to organically, all of a sudden, become assaulted by that. And then you have to figure out, well, what the hell do I do with this emotion, right? So the first thing you need to understand about parenthood is that none of us in this class are experts. We don't know. All we know is that you go somewhere, you meet someone, however way it may be, and you have sex, and all of a sudden you realize you're going to be a parent. Okay? Now, if you have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 kids, that's a different story. I doubt very much that makes you a better parent. To become good at anything, whether it's piano, whether it's riding your bicycle, what do you need? Lots of mindfulness, lots of awareness, lots of information, and lots of practice. You see this guy here? He didn't go through rehab overnight. It took him about 30 years. You try, you fail. You try, you fail. You try, you fail. And he didn't do his first smoking to become an addict. It just happens. Okay? You don't have sex because you know anything about sex. You don't have a child because you know anything about parenthood. Okay? It is part of who and what we are. The other thing you need to understand about sex is all living organisms on this planet only have one function: to survive. There is a reason why sex is so intense and our desire for it is so powerful. Why? It allows the human race to continue existing. Sex is unreflective. In other words, you don't ask yourself, should I have sex or not? Do I want to be attracted to this person or not? It just happens to you, man. Okay? And if it didn't, If you were to sit back and think, is this the right person to have sex with? Is this the right person to get married? Am I in the right place to have a child? You would never do it. You will never do it in a million years. Okay? So it is blind. That's the thing you need to understand. It is blind. And just because someone is 70, doesn't mean that they're educated mentally or intellectually. If you got 20 kids, it doesn't mean that you're a good parent. It just means you know how to have sex and you just know how to give them, hopefully, the basics. That's the first thing you need to understand. That parenthood, for the most part, is accidental. There are cultures where at a certain point, you just go to your mom, and your mom comes to you and says, it's time for you to get married. It's no longer accidental, it's cultural. Okay? There are those of us who assume that because you have a job, because you have some physical stability, emotional stability, intellectual stability, you're ready to be a parent. Now, you need to understand that parenthood is a mystery. You think just because you have the basics. It's like saying, I've been saving my money to buy a house. You buy a house, but you don't have the capacity to make it into a home. So your blinds are always shut. Your door is always closed. You will never invite anyone because you're not sociable. You don't like people. They don't like you. You don't really know how to talk to people. Okay? Now, so this is Julian. Okay? The problem now, Julian, is it doesn't really matter for the most part who and what you are. Okay? It doesn't matter your intentions. You are a slave to society. It's what we call social forces that are beyond your control as a father or as a mother. You cannot change Oakland. You cannot change the people in Oakland. You cannot get rid of alcohol. You cannot get rid of drugs. You cannot get rid of porn. You cannot get rid of violence. You can't do that. And despite your best intentions, your child will eventually be exposed. If you have financial resources, and I've had many students from Africa, Eritrea, Ethiopia. They're single, they're in my class. And one day after like 5 years, they come to my class to pay a visit with a companion now. We're getting married. Some of them come and say, we are married. And they come with a stroller. And I look inside, there's a child. What are you doing here? I just came here to say thank you and say goodbye. Why? Where are you going? I'm going back to my country. Why? America is no place to raise a child. I'm going to go back home to raise my child traditionally, culturally. When they get to be a certain age, then I will bring them back. Okay? So if you have the financial resources, for example, let's say you and your companion, she surprised you saying, Julian, we're going to have a child. Now, if you want to know how your child is going to be like anything else in life, if you want to make an omelet, what do? You pick out all the ingredients, take out from the fridge, okay? Once in a while, you taste the amount of salt. You taste the amount of pepper and other stuff in your omelet to see if it pleases your taste buds. You want to see how your child is going to be. Look out there. Look at society. Look at the forces. Ask yourself, what can I have control over? What sort of things do I not have power over? Okay? It's like you're tasting to see what your child is going to eat. Because all the stuff that society has, eventually they're going to be exposed to you and you're going to eat them. Okay? Now the question is, do people have the proper digestive system? So just in case your child is walking the street and there is a naked image, if your child asks you, so dad, what is that woman? What is that she has? Now that's going to kind of sound of an alarm in your head. How far do I want to take this? Is my child ready to kind of digest all this information, right? So if you are financially equipped, you go to your mom, you go to your dad and say, listen, so-and-so and I are going to be parents. Can you loan us $1 million? We want to go to Roseville. We want to go somewhere where there is not that much trash. I want to raise my kids in a safe environment. That's one thing you can do. Okay? Now remember, none of us in this class know how good of a parent will ever be. Why? Because there are so many unseen forces out there. A lot of people get married. 10, 20, 30 years later, they file for divorce. Why? Things just happen. So remember, all parents do the best that they can. Okay? You can't protect yourself if you don't understand the environment in which you live. It's impossible. How long does it take for you to understand anything, Julian? Now, she was asked saying that people need to know themselves. It's not true. People hardly know themselves. Like anything else, you want to understand something, if you want to understand yourself, it's an art. It's going to take you 20 years. You don't have time for that. So most of us come to this world blind. We function blindly and we leave blind. Now, there was a time in our history where you wouldn't be exposed to all the things that currently exposes us to. They didn't exist. About 3,000 years ago, there is a story about this tradition called Buddhism. You know, a woman becomes pregnant, and another woman goes to her and says, "You're going to have a child, you know, and this child will hate you. He may like you, but I think there's a good chance he may hate you." And you know, for mothers, it's a very devastating news. And the mom asks, "So what do I need to do to make sure this child will love me as opposed to hating me?" And this magician tells this woman that make sure that your child is never exposed to the realities of life. Now, in Buddha's time, the realities of life were make sure your child never sees sickness. Make sure your child never sees old age. Make sure your child never sees death. And by seeing, I mean the following. This is Stan. Stan is 70. You're 20, Julian. You see old age sitting in this class next to you. But it's not just seeing, it's taking Stan, taking him inside you and asking yourself, what does it mean to be old? What does it mean to have less time ahead of you and more time behind you? Why is it that old people have regrets? Why is it that people make so many mistakes? You internalize it, okay? You study it. Today, the story is very, very different. And remember, whenever you begin to study, examine something, it's not going to make you feel good. Why? Have you ever seen your skin under a microscope? Better yet, go to YouTube today if you can, if you have some time. Watch the experiments they've done. All these like imaging of what happens when two people kiss. Their lips, their saliva. It is truly, truly a disgusting scene. And then you kind of sit back and say, man, do I really want to do that again? And the answer is no, at least not while you're watching it. In other words, when you study anything up close and personal, it's truly disgusting. When my kids were born, I remember driving by this place, and it was always busy with young kids going to school. And I say, what is this place? Why are kids going there? There are all these places, why here? And then when my own kid came to a certain age, we had to kind of figure out, my wife and I, should we send them to public school? Should we send them to private school? I mean, you know, you look at Oakland, you look at public schools at Oakland. What do you do? So we decided to make them go private. Now, here's the thing about understanding the social forces, understanding how little power you have, and doing the best you can by saying them private. It means what? It means you have to make some serious sacrifices now. Maybe you wanted to retire, but now you can't. Maybe you wanted to go on vacation, but now you can't. In other words, whenever you study something up close and personal, you have to make some very, very, very difficult decisions in your life. Imagine you come to realize that your companion is alcoholic, or she drinks too much, or she's flirtatious too much. And you say, I was planning to marry her, but do I really want to risk it? When you study something, examine something up close and personal, and then what happens? You walk away. So your question is, at what stage is it best to expose your kids to this stuff? Let's start with the basics. When do you give an infant a piece of steak? Julian, it's a question. You've never had kids. So you start with giving them milk. Then when they get a little older, you give them some potatoes, carrots, you mash them, okay, make into a paste, then you give it to them. Then they get to a place where you slowly give them solids, but solids that are soft, because they have to chew the solids with their gums. Then after a while, you give them like meat, tiny, tiny chunks. Okay? Now imagine you want to give someone porn. Tell me the process. At what stage? Because you're no longer dealing with physical digestibility. Now you're saying, I'm going to give something to your eyes, and then you're going to start thinking and then feeling. How are you going to digest the things you're seeing and the things you're feeling? What are you going to do? How are you going to train them? No, you can't teach them.
Japanese culture, they have a tendency to have communal baths. Everybody creates food wherever else.
It's very, very true. I think it's I think a good policy that whenever, whether you guys are in this class or other classes, or when you're amongst your friends or parents and you're having a relatively kind of difficult conversation, it's good to refer to cultures such as Eritrea, Africa, Japan, various other places, fine. But remember, you and I live in Oakland. Remember what we talked about the other day. To go very far, you have to start with very near. We are not in Montclair. This is not Yale. This is not Oxford. Okay? Our parents are not reflective. They have their own lives, okay? Because after a certain while, any mother, any father is going to look at their lives and says, I spent 40 years on my kids, look at my life now. Who's there to take care of me? No one. So after a certain while, they have their own issues. Add to it, in an age where money is really tough to come by, rent's expensive, food is expensive, everything is expensive, and everybody is poor for time. Nobody has time. Nobody has patience. None of us in this class have infinite amount of energy. There comes a point where as a mother or father, you get frustrated. And the only thing you can give your kids are your frustrations, are your anger, are your disappointments, okay? So to understand anything really, really well, embody the place you have in history. You are 20, you live in Oakland. It's not Montclair. It's not Piedmont. You're not privileged. Your parents don't have billions of dollars in an account, okay? As long as you know full well where you stand, then you say, okay, you know, Japanese culture is really good. Eritrean culture is really good. Mexican culture is really, really good. But I live in Oakland. I have no connection to these cultures. What the hell do I do? If I was to give you a very, very real answer, I would say, you're a young man in America. You can't avoid not having sex unless you want to be a monk. unless you want to go to church every single day for the next 10 years to have enough shame and guilt inside you so that even thinking about sex would bring shame to you. Okay? So you have no choice but to be attracted to someone out there. And eventually, because of the way desires function, you will eventually want to be intimate with them. The best thing you can ever do for yourself, the person you're with, and your parents, and your grandparents, and your community, have protected sex. Never assume you're ready. Never. Just because you have the down payment to a house, it doesn't mean you'll be able to make the monthly mortgages. It's okay? Because everything is insecure. Go back to the movie Bruce Lee played some years ago. It's called Enter the Dragon. If you've seen it, so what happens is they're about to fight. Bruce Lee is facing this man, and the man takes out a piece of board and just punches it, and the board shatters into 20 pieces. And Bruce Lee looks at him and says, "Boards never hit back." And then they begin to fight. Now, why would this white guy punch a board and break it? Because he assumes that he knows that he is much better than Bruce Lee. Remember, you're not yet in this fight of being a parent, of raising a kid, studying society. There is no fight for you. The only thing that you have now intellectually is what is the best way to raise a child. Okay? Once you get into the fight, once your hands get dirty, you have no idea what's going to happen to you, man. You think you have the patience of Job, but you don't. You think you have all the intellectual and emotional resources to take care of a child. You don't. You know, when in the Old Testament you read, it's the 5th commandment, that thou shalt honor thy parents. When it comes to 21st century, the only thing you can do is honor the story that lives inside the parent's head. They're excited, man, to have a child. They want this child to be a genius, to be something, to have a meaningful life, to not suffer from loneliness, anxiety, depression, confusion. I mean, these are beautiful stories you have. But when these stories take root in the physical world, it's a failure. It's difficult. It's just difficult being a parent. Now, you ask this question. Let me take this question and then kind of put it within a couple of different contexts. It may be that you're asking this question in a very indirect way. Let me break this down. You started watching porn, you started drinking, you started perhaps smoking weed or other things at the age of 12. Now at the age of 22, 23, you realize you wasted a lot of time, a lot of energy, and you've kind of realized your mistakes. You're still addicted to some of those things, but you ask yourself, where were my parents? How come they didn't slap me, punch me, kick me, stop me, like cage me in a room? So I didn't have to kind of, at this stage in my life, face myself and realize how horrifying my life really is. Okay. The other, maybe you have come to a place where you have wasted a lot of time, and you say, well, my parents are in the business of protecting the innocence of any child, me. How could they kind of go so wrong in educating me? Okay. The other is maybe your best friend, maybe a brother, maybe a sister. Maybe they're about to become a parent, and you ask them, what is the best way to be a parent? Your question is very much like climate change. What can we do to stop the damage? The truth is, I don't know. It's a great question. And I don't think anyone in this class has any answers, myself included. There are lots of theories out there. Let me tell you a story. You may really not be interested, and I may be just rambling on, but that's besides the point. So let me just say it. Just to kind of reveal how little power parents have. Before I tell you the story that comes from the Gospel of Matthew, let me just also say this to you. 0 to about 9 They are the most important years of any kid's life. You know, when you want to build a house and you kind of pour concrete, you've made the frame, you put the rebars, and now you want to put the concrete down. If the concrete is uneven, when you go to put the walls up, the walls are not going to match. And your job is going to be really, really tough. You either have to grind down the concrete, or you have to put self-leveling concrete, or you have to just chop the studs so for all of them to match. And a job that would take maybe a year, now it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 years. If they're formative years, and it's called formative because you're forming the child, what do kids need? Kids need care. Kids need love. Kids need stability. If any of these things are not there, you're going to have problems. And you're going to spend the rest of your life dealing with these problems. If, for example, you didn't have a father in your life, whoever your man is going to be very much like your father. Because if your father has never shown you love, you're not going to find some guy who's going to give you lots of love. It's unfamiliar to you. You have no idea what to do with it. We are copy machines, man. Okay? What you see from 0 to 9 is what you eventually want to have in your own life. Okay? Do you have any questions thus far? No, go ahead. It's okay. Sure. I'm going to give you a very, very realistic picture of what it means to be a parent. And it's a universal theme. It's like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Because all kids, everywhere, for the most part, are going to do it. 90% of children on this planet are going to go through these episodes. You ready? Read the Gospel of Matthew, and the story is called The Prodigal Son. Have you heard the story? Okay, so let me tell it to you. You have, and for those of you who will eventually become parents, even if the way I'm telling you the story you don't like or if it's boring, go home, grab the Gospel of Matthew and read the story. Read it 20 times. Not because you like it, just have it in your memory. Because once you become a parent, it'll just kick in. Okay? So this is you, Julian, and you have 2 kids. One is Sam, okay? One is Mike, okay? Sam is 20 years old. Mike is 35 years old. You are, let's just say, 80. For whatever the reasons are. Who is this? Mike? Mike was born to be a conformist. In other words, when your mom says, wash dishes, okay. Vacuum, fine. Do school, okay. Buy milk and come back home. When Sam, you say to him, can you do school? No. Can you wash dishes? Heck no. So Sam happens to be unruly. Mike, on the other hand, listens and obeys. So you have 2 kids. Okay? Now, remember what happens when you're an unconformist. You don't play the game that your parents create for you. At a certain point, Sam has the audacity, the shamelessness of going to say Julian and says, Dad, listen, you know I love you, but you're also old. You're going to die. You have about 100 million in your bank. You're going to give 50 of it to my big brother, Mike, and you're going to give the other 50 to me. Instead of waiting till you're dead, looking at your will, going to the bank, give it to me now. And the father says, okay. The first thing you need to ask is this. This is an 80-year-old man. Why doesn't he sit you down and talk to you, educate you about the importance of money? About the importance of money in the hands of someone who doesn't know how to use it well. Okay? Importance of time and how quickly it goes. He doesn't sit him down and talk about respect. None of that. Why? There is something profoundly insightful about this man. He knows that because Sam is unruly and has never really been ruly, even if he says no to the money, he'll go behind his back, somehow find the account, grab the money and run. He also knows that when you're young, you will never take advice well. Go back to the Garden of Eden story. Even if God tells you don't go there, you will. That's the first thing you need to understand about human beings. It doesn't matter how many times you tell your kids, don't do drugs, don't do porn. If they're exposed, and if there is something attractive about the things that they see, they will walk towards it. Man, you don't have to go very far. Just look at your own life. Pay attention to it. And you'll find how true this is. How many times did your parents tell you not to do A, B, C, D? To some you listened, to many you didn't. And then eventually all of us have to pay the price. All of us have to. Okay? It's what the Hindus call karma. Eventually you have to take care of all the wrong things that you have done. You have created this imbalance in your universe, and somehow you need to make it harmonized, man. Okay? So what happens? The father gives this guy all the money. He doesn't say no. He didn't say wait. He didn't say read a couple of books. Here's the money, go. I had a friend some years ago. His daughter went to him and said, Dad, in high school, and this is in Cupertino, San Jose area, really good school. She says, come home. She comes on home and says, everybody's doing weed. And my friends are encouraging me to do weed. What do you think, Dad? And my friend, he comes from a very traditional background. He says, well, I had a couple of choices. I could either punish her for saying those things, thinking those things, or I could say, you know what? Why don't you and I smoke together tomorrow? Because if you say no to your child, she's going to go out there somewhere. And you have no idea what she's going to smoke. You have no idea after smoking what she's going to be exposed to. Or you can create a safe environment and say, you know what, you and I will smoke. And you as a father or a mother, I'm not encouraging this, but that was what he did. Because I can't force my kid not to smoke. Eventually she's going to slip. Eventually she's going to want to keep her friends. And one of the ways you keep your friends is by saying yes to them. They smoked a couple of times, and then she said, I don't think I like this. That was it.